Chapter 40. One should love those opportunities of practicing virtue which are particularly difficult. On no account, beloved, must you flee from what may be a chance for acquiring virtue. On the contrary, whenever such a chance offers itself, you should accept it with joy, regarding as best and most welcome such things as are unpleasant to your heart and evoke no sympathy in you. I predict that, with God's help, you will actually do so, if you engrave deeply in your mind the following thoughts. First, you should realize that the opportunities for virtue you meet with are the best means you can have for acquiring it, given you by God in answer to your prayer. Having formed a desire to gain virtue, you have, of course, prayed to God to grant it to you, and in praying for it, you could not avoid praying also for the methods and means of acquiring this gift. But God does not give, for instance, the virtue of patience without afflictions, nor the virtue of humility without humbling occasions of degradation and dishonor. So after your prayer about these virtues, He sends you corresponding opportunities. What are you doing then in running away and avoiding them? You reject God's help for which you prayed, and mock the gift of God. So decide to welcome gladly the chances you meet for virtue, and the more gladly the more difficulties they offer. For in such cases our virtuous actions evoke great courage and reveal great moral strength. And through this we make each time a considerable step forward on the path of virtue, which alone should be our constant aim. I should explain here that in advising you to use the most important occasions to gain virtue, I do not mean to advise you to disregard the less important chances, or to miss them through neglecting them. No, you should never miss any of them, whether important or unimportant, in order to be working always for virtue. For instance, you should bear patiently not only blatant abuse and reviling, or, if it so happens, blows, but even a scowling and a scornful expression, or a sharp word. Since such unimportant cases are more frequent, our right reactions have more chances of showing themselves, and so keep our moral strength in a constant state of tension, thus giving us enough force to behave as we should also on important occasions. If we disregard these opportunities, we weaken our moral strength and render it less capable of dealing with important occasions. Secondly, make firm in yourself the conviction and faith that all things happening to us happen according to God's will and for our profit, so that we may gain thereby a certain spiritual fruit. Although we cannot suppose that some things, such as our sins and those of other people, are a direct result of a willed action of God's, yet even they do not happen without God's leave, as a means of admonishing and humbling us. As regards sufferings and afflictions, which are our own fault or due to the malice of others, God Himself sends them, desiring us to suffer and be tormented by them, in order to gain the blessing of virtue, which we are bound to earn if we endure as we should the trial He has sent to us. The same applies to other judgments of His, hidden from us, but doubtless right and blessed. Thus convinced that God Himself wishes you to endure the hardship and grief which assails you, either arising from the evil nature of other people, or invited by your own wrong actions, you will not cease to think and say as some others do, "No, this does not come from God. It is unjust and criminal, and God does not want crime, and turns away with loathing from it, and from those who commit it." By this they want to justify their lack of patience and gusts of anger and feelings of revenge they feel at the sight of injustice. But in actual fact, the only thing they achieve is to rebel against God's ordinance, and to attempt to cast off the life-saving cross, imposed on them by God for their own good, instead of shouldering it with a good heart, which would undoubtedly be pleasing to Him. And what do they get? They cannot cast off their cross, they offend God, and they still gain no peace. On the contrary, To grief they add contention and useless irritation, and render their state unbearable. Whereas, had they borne what happened with a good heart, they would have been at peace, and even would have attracted God's benevolence, and would have eaten richly of the fruit of the Spirit. So make it a rule for yourself, when you meet with injustices, injuries, and attacks, pay no attention to them, however wrong your offenders may be, but keep your attention firmly on one thing alone, that God let this happen for your own good, and that you will deprive yourself of this good if you admit impatience, irritation, or contention in connection with it. And do not try to analyze the exact reason why God has allowed this. Do you believe that God is always right and merciful? Then believe on this occasion too that He shows you justice and mercy, although you do not see how. And remember how the Lord blesses those who behave thus. Blessed are they that have not seen, and yet have believed. Do you believe that the words of your Lord, "Take up thy cross," refers to you personally? If you believe this, then take it up. The Lord has laid it on your shoulders in the present grievous case. Do not say, "It is too heavy." God knows better the measure of your strength. To some God sends trials and sorrows, brought about by circumstances, and in no way dependent on people. These are more easily borne. To others He sends causes by people, and they are harder, especially when we cannot take the grief caused to us as unintentional, and still harder when we have done some good to those people. The last case is hard to bear. If God sends you this, know that it is precisely what is most useful to you, and to this realization add the inspiring thought. God sees that you are strong enough to bear it, and expects you to actually bear it with a good heart, without complaining. So do not disappoint God's expectation. I must add that God prefers us to endure afflictions coming from the evil nature of people, especially from those to whom we have done some good, rather than those which are the accidental result of unfavorable circumstances. Why? Because our native pride is more easily subdued and exterminated by the former than by the latter. And also because, if obedience to God's will is the chief thing in our spiritual doing, there is no better way of provoking and manifesting it to a greater degree than in such cases, if we bear it with a good heart, giving warm thanks to God for sending them, since they are truly a great blessing, thus testifying to our complete obedience to the divine will, and to an ardent zeal in conforming ourselves in everything to this will. This disposition precedes the visitation of rigorous trials. Seeing the birth of such a disposition, and wishing to make it stronger and more deeply rooted, God sends us a cup of the strongest temptations, which, when borne with willingness, good heart, and gladness, always brings this blessed spiritual fruit. Therefore, knowing this, wishing and seeking it, we must accept this cup from the hands of God, shutting the eyes of inquisitiveness, and with complete faith, clearly see in it the great love of God for us, and the assurance of our spiritual progress. Thus we must drain it with joy. The more willingly, the more bitter is its taste. Chapter 41. How to progress in one and the same virtue in different circumstances. In one of the earlier chapters, we said that it is more useful and advantageous to spend some time exercising oneself in one virtue than in many virtues at once, and that therefore one should turn to the profit of this one virtue all the events we meet, however different they may be. Now listen, and I will show you how this can be done without difficulty. If, for example, it should happen that on the same day, or even in the course of the same hour, you are blamed unjustly for an action blameless in itself, or you are refused some request, or if something happens and you are unfairly suspected of something bad, or if some bodily illness afflicts you, or if one of your superiors compels you to do something you do not like, or you meet some other unpleasant and unbearable thing, of which our poor human life is so full, then, because of the varied nature of these or similar occurrences, differing virtuous actions are demanded of you. But, following the rule you have established, it is better for you to direct them all towards exercising yourself in the particular virtue you are working on at the time. Thus, if at the moment you meet the occurrences mentioned, you are chiefly exercising yourself in patience, then take care to endure them with patience and joy. If you are chiefly occupied with progress and humility, strive to realize that you deserve every kind of evil and have earned the adversities you have met with. If your work is to acquire the virtue of obedience, force yourself to bend your neck submissively to the mighty hand of God, and for the sake of pleasing Him, willingly submit to His creatures, whether or not they have reason or life, through whom He sends you these adversities and afflictions. If you are striving to succeed in poverty, incite in yourself contentment, joy, and thankfulness that you are deprived of all earthly and worldly comfort. If you labor at making your love both higher and more deeply rooted, try to provoke in yourself feelings of love for your neighbor, since at that moment he is an instrument of the good you may extract from these incidents. And urge yourself to love God since, now as always, He is the first cause of love, and sends such afflictions or allows them for your spiritual progress. From what I have said, you can see for yourself how to use, for the exercise of one and the same virtue, adversities which are not brief, but last for a long time, such as illness, for instance, or similar things.